So welcome everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to our workshop, Sustainable Development Goals. What should protected areas do? My name is Esther Bossing. I am EUROPARC's communications officer, and together with my colleague Sandra and with Christoph Matthias, I will guide you through this workshop today, where we'll look at the role of protected areas when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. So just to start off, a few basic workshop rules. This workshop is indeed being recorded. So if you're not comfortable with appearing on the recording, you can of course turn off your microphone or your webcam, but I really encourage everyone to keep your webcams on. This is a participatory workshop, so it's a lot easier to engage with somebody where you can actually see their face. I'm also asking you if you could please rename yourself to include your name and institution. For reporting purposes, we need to send a list of the participants to the overseeing national agency. So it would be great if you could indicate your name and organization. To do so, just go to the participants list, find your name, and either there will be 3 little dots or it will say more. And then you can click on that and click on rename, and there you can type whatever you want. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to use the chat box. I see some of you have already done so, and we'll be sure to help you in whatever way possible. Generally speaking, please keep your microphones off. There will be some time for live interventions, and you'll be able to speak because we'll also move into breakout rooms. But when it comes to when we're in the plenary, if you want to speak up on something, either use the chat, or when we're allowing live interventions, use the raise hand button. Like I said, this workshop is being recorded, and the presentation and the recording will be made available both on our website, and you'll get it in your inbox as well in the upcoming week. There we go. As I was saying, this is really an interactive workshop, a participatory workshop. So I really welcome all to actively join us today. It's not just listening. We're also going to be doing, especially in the second part of our workshop. Feel free to contribute. This is really a space where we can engage and learn with each other when it comes to the Sustainable Development Goals. So don't be afraid to speak up and provide us with your input. Just quickly, for those that might not know us, so the EUROPARC Federation is organizing this workshop, and we are the biggest networking organization for protected areas in Europe. Our members include national parks, regional nature parks, marine protected areas, and urban and peri-urban parks, but also governmental institutions and other civil society organizations. We aim to support the work of our members through the organization of workshops like these, seminars. We organize a yearly conference. We have commissions and task forces that work on specific topics like climate change or sustainable agriculture. We provide training opportunities, and we are also representing our members and protected areas in Brussels, where we work on policy papers. We are constantly dialoguing with different European institutions. And of course, we're highlighting and promoting the work of our members through case studies and toolkits on our website as well. So today, we'll be looking at the SDGimp project and the Sustainable Development Goals as a whole. And like I said, I'll be guiding you through this workshop, and we're starting with our check-in, which is what we're doing right now. And in just a few seconds, I'll open up a Mentimeter, where I'd love to hear what your connection is to the SDGs. Then we'll move to our info point, and Christoph Matthias will take over. He's a researcher at the Institute for Rural Development Research, and he will tell us all about the SDGimp project and the outcomes. Then he'll take us on a fly through of the website and we'll go in depth in one of the learning modules. Then I'm passing the floor to you guys, and I would love to hear what you think. We'll have a little Mentimeter prioritization exercise before we move into our short break. And after the break, the really participatory element of our workshop starts. I will first give a little bit more information on what it actually is when we're talking, or what we actually mean when we're talking about sustainable development and why this is relevant for protected areas. Then we'll move into breakout groups and we'll work in little groups on some questions in Jamboards. Now I'll explain everything once we get there, but we'll have some questions for you that you'll answer together with other participants. After that, we get back into plenary and I'll do some harvesting, as we call it, where I'll look at your inputs and try to summarize what you've been saying. And of course, this will be a moment where we'll allow live interventions if anybody would like to make a comment or a suggestion. And then we're already at the end of our workshop and we're in our checkout, and then we're going to look at, okay, what will be your next steps in regards to the Sustainable Development Goals. But before we get to all of that, we'd like to get to know you a little bit better. So my colleague Sandra will now put a link and a code in the chat. So please just go to menti.com and use the code 88979897. You can do it either on your phone or through your laptop or computer. And you'll be able to give just a few phrases, a few words that help us understand a little bit more what you already know about the SDGs, or, well, what brought you to this workshop. So I'll stop sharing for now. And I'll move to the Menti. So go to menti.com and use the code 88979897. I already see some words popping up. I'll share my screen in a second, but I don't want to taint your thoughts. So all right, more and more inputs. Thank you. I'll slowly start sharing my screen. Feel free to keep on adding your inputs to the Menti. So I see that we have somebody from our charter parks. That's great. Work tasks, supporting national parks, regional development, definitely very important. Agriculture, of course, also a big topic for our parks. Sustainability and education. I see that multiple people are indicating that. And sustainable tourism. Of course, these are very hot topics for protected areas where I'm thinking a good portion of you will be coming from. Awesome, great. That gives us a little bit of an idea of who our audience is today. So feel free to keep populating that. I'll leave the Menti open for a little bit longer. Before I now slowly pass the floor to Christoph Matthias. And as indicated, he will tell us some more about the SDG project and the outcomes that they have found. So Christoph, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esther, and welcome all of you here in this great webinar. I'm going to share my screen now with you to give you a short presentation on the project and what we have been doing. So in the SDGimp project, we have thought about the SDGs, and the idea was that we develop information materials and working materials to support protected areas in implementing the SDGs. Therefore, the acronym SDGimp. So we are really about supporting protected areas with the implementation of the SDGs. But I want to start a little bit earlier and talk about about the SDGs. So protected areas as regions, as model regions for sustainable developments, also have to deal somehow with the SDGs. And the SDGs were adopted 6 years ago by all nations as part of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the great thing about it is that the Agenda for Sustainable Development provides us with a common framework for sustainable development. So this usually often used as a buzzword, sustainable development, now becomes much more clear as we have these 17 sustainable development goals. And these 17 goals, they are operationalized by 169 targets. Now, if we want to be the protected areas as model regions for sustainable development goals, for sustainable development, we have to think about how to implement the SDGs in protected areas. So in that case, when we look at protected areas, we have a wide range of different kind of types of protected areas, and we have to figure out how to deal with the different approaches, with the different administrative structures. And we found that in all that, the protected areas, they cannot implement the SDGs alone, but they have to work with the civil society, they have to work with businesses in their regions and outside of their regions. And of course, when we talk about national parks in this context, as a protected area, in this case especially, we mean also the surrounding areas where most of the actual development takes place, because of course inside the national park there is much less of development or none. So this is the context of the project, and when I say we in the consortium, we talk about the Institute for Rural Development Research. That's where I'm working at, and we are a research institution. And yeah, we have been working with protected areas for quite a while now, and also work on rural development. But we have worked with another protected area that we have in our consortium, the Biosphere Reserve Blieskau. We also have a technical partner from Lithuania, the Baltic Education and Technology Institute. We have a university from Poland in our project, an adult education institution from Romania, and a regional development agency from Spain. And of course, not to forget the EUROPARC Federation that is hosting this webinar here. So trying to think about the protected areas and how to support protected areas in implementing the SDGs, we came up with two different outputs. The first output is basically learning modules on each SDG, because if you want to implement the SDGs, you have to know the SDGs and you have to make the connection between the individual SDG and your work in protected areas. So each module that we have developed for each SDG consists of about 30 slides. And first we introduce the SDGs and its target. We distinct between targets that are more relevant for protected areas and targets that are less relevant for protected areas. Of course, with some targets, that is very simple. For example, if targets relate to the national or global level, then it's obviously less relevant for protected areas. But with other targets, it's maybe a little bit more complicated. And then, of course, you have to still think if that's, in your case, still relevant or might be less relevant. The second thing that we do in this outcome is we present major issues related to the SDGs, and we connect it to the situation in or off protected areas. And we try to provide you with information about consequences like climate change, and then come to solutions and best practice examples, and how these solutions can be implemented in protected areas. And obviously, as I mentioned before, not only from the administration of protected areas alone, but also from regional partners. And at the end, we provide you with some additional information and links, so you get an idea and additional materials to continue with getting to know the SDGs and learning about the things that you can do in that field and area. So when you have a little bit of knowledge about the specific SDG, you can move on to our second output. And basically what we do here is we provide you with some decision support materials, 4 tools in total, a guideline for developing a sustainability strategy or an action fiche. So how do you identify issues? How do you plan activities or actions? And this is explained here in this guideline. We have a little sustainability check, so you can think about all your projects and see if they are sustainable or how you can improve the sustainability of your projects. The third tool is a check for the implementation of SDGs. You can make an assessment what your activities contribute to the SDGs, but also how to, but also you can assess the overall implementation of SDGs in your protected area to get an idea what is maybe a pressing issue, where should you think about a project, and where to start an activity. The fourth and last tool is also very important. It's from municipalities. We think that municipalities are very important partners of protected areas and contribute quite a lot to sustainable development in the region because they set the framework for sustainable development. So we included a check for municipal decision makers. So when they get resolutions before they adapt it, they can have and use this check in order to see whether that decision is sustainable or contributes to sustainable development or not. And that also helps decision makers to improve their decision making and contributing to the SDGs. So at this point, I want to stop. I think it was a little bit theoretical. So I give you room for questions now if you have questions. And afterwards, I would like to actually show you what we have done live and in real time, let's say, and then it becomes much more clear what we are talking about here. But before we do that, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, Christoph, actually, it might be a bit beyond the scope of this workshop, but there was a question in the chat on how you understand that SDG 8, so decent work and economic growth, can be understood within a macro ecosystem on planet Earth with finite resources and limited boundaries. Not sure, maybe it surpasses a little bit the scope of this workshop, but if you have any inputs, then feel free to answer.
Well, yeah, I guess it goes to a very global scale. But then again, I guess especially biosphere reserves also have this kind of global scale on network, the world network, and have especially the task to think beyond their boundaries and have this global partnership, not only between the biosphere administrations, but also between the regions and the people. And when we come to other categories of protected areas, we can also think of education for sustainable development, which also has this understanding that we have to understand the consequences of our doing and, for example, in consumption. And that also has this aspect of global labor, fair trade, global markets, global economy in it, I think. And that would be maybe an idea how to connect this global economy sphere on the one hand with the work and the scale of protected areas on the other hand. And I think protected areas and their work have to make this connection in order to actually support sustainable development. I don't think that really answers your question, but I hope this makes the connection between the SDG 8 and 9 and protected areas a little bit.
All right, thank you, Christoph. I think just also with an eye on the time, I think we should move on to the fly through of the website and look at the module. So feel
Thank
free
you very
to,
much.
no worries, feel free to share your screen again.
Okay, so what you see here now is our website. We have this nice landing page and we introduce the SDGs. You can click on it and you see all the targets in detail. You can also see, again, the partners, and you can learn something about the project. But what might be more interesting for you is we have this interactive map of good practices. You can zoom in if you're interested in good practices, and then you see like a little pop-up and it introduces a project. You have here a filter where you can filter for different SDGs and then get to know best practice examples. Then we have the SDG learning platform that is loading right now. And there we have an introduction to the SDGs, a short one. And then we have the SDG modules. And I'm going to show you one later. And yeah, it's still loading. I think the interesting part here is that we were surprised that we could find a lot of protected areas with activities for every SDG, and even those SDGs that are not traditionally linked to the work of protected areas, for example, gender equality or other areas like reduce inequalities. So when you have this web page, this page, you can just check for the SDG you're interested in, and then you can, for example, click on read more. And then you have this Google slide presentation popping up. And I'm now going to show you the learning module SDG 9 for industry, innovation, and infrastructure, because I think it's not a typical SDG that would be related to protected areas. But I want to show you that we have to transform all our activities, the way we produce things, the way we consume things, and in order to have sustainable development. So we introduce what we are going to do here now. We are going to introduce the SDG. we are going to show why SDG 9 is relevant for sustainable development, and we are presenting the targets. I'm going to skip now the introduction of SDGs because I think you all know what the SDGs are. And we start with a little bit of basic information about industry, innovation, and infrastructure, what it includes. We are looking at the targets. As I said before, the relevant targets for protected areas are here: resilient infrastructures, sustainable economic growth, and the retrofit of industries to make them more sustainable is something that we think protected areas can contribute to. Then are obviously targets where they cannot contribute too much, like upgrading technological capabilities and other things. So what we say relevant issues are is basically that we have a carbon economy and that we have a lack of infrastructure for sustainable development. And we give you a little bit more detailed information on that. And then we continue with activities and the role of protected areas. And there it's especially important that, as I mentioned before, protected area administrations cannot act alone. They are really dependent on their stakeholders and partners from the civil society, from the private sector, and from the public administrations. And what we think here, we have target group specific solutions. So you can look up what the different stakeholder groups, your partners, can actually help you with on different areas. So from the adoption of sustainable best practices in facility operations, from the reduction of noise and artificial at nighttime, from the use of renewable energies, green transport, retrofitting buildings, and all those kind of things. We have very interesting best practice examples. This, for example, is the workroom Schaffhausen in the nature park of Schaffhausen in Switzerland. And their local businesses, they collaborate, and together they have this project, which is also another best practice example. They collaborate in the workroom to develop new sustainable products, and they have this Schaffhauser house, which is actually a house that they built together, architects, and also kind of different kinds of handcraftsmanship, from wood construction to plumbing, and all that is they are using as much as possible local resources, and they actually have this local house developed there, and you can buy it, you can live in it. So this is one example. Then we have the part where we come to the infrastructure aspects, and of course we have electric cars here. This is an example from the Spain Biosphere Reserve, where they increase the charging network for electric cars. We have another infrastructure best practice example. It's a heating district in a village in a German biosphere reserve, where they have a heating district with bioenergy. And we have different kind of solutions, so regulation and service provision, which targets local municipal administrations and county administrations. This is basically about working with businesses, working with universities, and promoting change instead of establishing new infrastructures like the examples before. And all that can be put into a sustainable development plan, like here in Andalusia in Spain. And another approach is to give prizes or awards to very innovative solutions in order to have an incentive for innovations. And we have this innovation award in switched against with Nature Park. And then obviously the overall a vibrant economy can be seen in a network for sustainability, like here in the Biosphere Reserve Berchtesgadener Land, where different branches, different corporations come together to exchange ideas how to be more sustainable and what works, what does not work. So this really exchange of knowledge, this working together is a very interesting approach here. I talked about the Schaffhauser house before. Here again, we just have a little bit more information on that. I think it's really interesting because it brings a lot of aspects together. It brings together the different companies. It brings together the local sourcing from forestry that has to be sustainable, going up the value chain from, basically using wood and other materials, and then the consumer in the region that can buy this locally sourced house. And it's really something more than the typical regional products from a sustainable agriculture. This is really industrial. It's a big market, and it's a lot of change, and it's really great to have an industrial example like this, that protected areas can also work on this much higher and industrialized scale. Yes, and of course, we have something like that, like an innovation cell, where people come together and think of new products. This is also something that's really interesting. And then we have a more classic example, but I also like this very much. We have this innovations from hiking guides. So the hiking guides, they know what the people they hike with want, what they are looking for, and they give advice to the local tourism offices. So what kind of hotels or places where people want to eat, want to sleep, do the people want? And the hiking guides, they know that, and they work kind of like consultants in order to develop the tourism a little bit further. And so this is a really good way of making use of the local knowledge in order to foster sustainable development. We have more information here about sustainable development plans, about the SDG and ecotourism, for example. And yeah, then we end this presentation with the question, what can you do? And that question brings me then to our next section. So we want to support you in actually doing something, and that is supported by our download center. And if you look here, we have the 4 different materials that I showed before. We have a little bit of an introduction for each, and you can see here the stakeholder, the target groups that we want to address with that tool. If you want to make it have a decision-making check, you can look here and you find this little description, and then you can download, go to the download button, and you can find the tool here. Yes, so this is the presentation of the website. Feel free to have a look for yourself, a more detailed, slowly look what you find interesting, what maybe is relevant for your work in your protected area. I'm inviting you to really, use the materials that are there. You can download the materials, you can show it online. We will have the webpage online for at least the next 3 years. You can use it as a source of knowledge You don't have to learn it all right away. You can just, it's enough if you know that all the knowledge is there, and you can look it up if you want to. So yeah, at this point, that's from my side, and I'm interested to hear more about you, your work, and how you relate to the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this very interesting run through of the outcomes of the project and the website. I think it's a lot of food for thought and also just a lot of resources that we can use for the second half of our workshop today. But before we get there, we've seen now that even SDGs that might not typically as a protected area catch your attention, so to say, are actually also of interest to your work. But I'm asking you at the moment to go back to menti.com. You can use the same code as before, 88979897. Sandra has also put it in the chat. And I would love to hear from you what you think, which SDGs are most relevant for your protected area, or if you're not coming from a protected area, for your area of work. So you should be able to vote for 2 SDGs. And I'll share my screen again with your results. So just go to menti.com and use the code 88979897. I already see some votes coming in. Very good. I'll share my screen. So what I think is not necessarily a shock that life on Earth is the most, let's say, obvious SDG for protected areas or those working in nature conservation, strictly immediately followed by, of course, climate action and health and well-being. So I see that some, like the SDG that Christoph just introduced, might not at first catch your attention up. Now it got a vote. Was that you, Christoph? But I think in the second half of this workshop, we're really gonna ask you to think hard. And we'll also look at maybe some of the less traditional protected areas, SDGs, so to say. So thank you for voting. So we're just going to take a little break, just 5 minutes, just to give you a moment to refresh, maybe do a little bit of stretching. I know that sitting behind a desk all day, you sometimes need a good stretch. So that's probably what I'll be doing. And we'll be back in 5 minutes. So that is 15:40. And then we'll really get into the participatory element of this workshop. So I'll see you all in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. I hope you were able to enjoy this short little break, maybe even get some fresh air. I know it was just 5 minutes, but I think it's good to take a little break from the screen every now and then. So, as I said, we're now really going to move into the participatory element of our workshop. And in a few minutes, we'll move into breakout rooms. However, before we do so, I do want to provide a little bit more context on what we're working on at the moment. So I think what Christoph also already mentioned, it's that sustainable development can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I just want to frame a little bit what sustainable development is and then bring it back to the protected areas, why they should help and how they should help. So what is sustainable development? Well, sustainable development has been defined by the UN as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, for sustainable development to be achieved, it is crucial to harmonize three core elements: economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection. And these elements are all interconnected and are all essential for the well-being of individuals and societies. Like I said, everything is connected, and these 17 goals are all included in the UN Agenda 2030, which stands for Humane Living Conditions Worldwide and the implementing of the model of sustainable development. And the SDGs in that are described as the blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and into the future. So big global goals. And the 17 SDGs, they are integrated. So they recognize that the action in one area will affect the outcome in others. And SDGs address these global challenges we all face. And those include, of course, climate change, environmental degradation, but also poverty, inequality, a lack of peace and justice. And most of the actions arising from the goals need to be adopted at a country level. And it's clear that at a strategic and regional level, protected areas should be part of the delivery and implementation to help create these model regions of sustainable development. So that brings me to, why should protected areas join? Well, first of all, the most basic answer would be that implementing the UN Sustainable Development Goals is something that has been agreed by all countries as the way forward to achieve a better and more sustainable future for us all. So all UN countries have made this commitment to acknowledge these goals and, most of all, mitigate climate change and biodiversity loss. And to reach these goals, an effort is to be made by all aspects of society. And this, of course, also includes our natural heritage. Now, when looking at this graph here, you can see that the most, so to say, obvious fields of work for protected areas are related to the biosphere. And at the same time, this is the very basis upon which the other element rests, and as such, essential. And although it is true that protected areas are essential for the conservation of biodiversity and landscape, they are and definitely can be more than that. The protected areas have the potential to be laboratories of change and to promote a more socially inclusive, environmentally healthy, and economically viable model for society. And why do they have this potential? Well, the global goals recognize that everything is connected, and well-functioning protected areas are already working together with a network of partners in their areas on topics like climate change adaptation, sustainable agriculture, or research and innovation. The protected area is way more than just the flora and fauna they harbor. And therefore, protected areas have the potential to be multipliers of local solutions that will bring about the changes needed to create a more sustainable Europe. And it's already obvious that across many European policies, well-functioning protected areas are needed for them to be successful. And as such, the Sustainable Development Goals really are no exception. Just to further underline the importance of protected areas for a healthy, green, and fair society, EUROPARC last year released a position paper on the role of nature regional landscape parks in a number of European and global policies. And this position paper effectively demonstrates why these parks are well placed to become model regions of sustainable development. And this can really be upscaled for the wider range of protected areas. This overview is part of the position paper, and it demonstrates just how important our protected areas are for the indicated policies. And as you can see, this goes way past the scope of the more traditional fields of work, like biodiversity conservation, but also the other things that in the little poll we just held, everyone mentioned, like education or health. I really do encourage you to have a look at this paper. My colleague Sandra will put a link in the chat, and all these case studies that you see here are included both in the paper and in our knowledge hub. And you can see that this wide range of case studies are linked to at least one or more sustainable development goals. And as the SDGimp project has indicated already, there's something together from all of the SDGs for protected areas. However, I've done enough talking for now. It's now your turn. We will move into breakout rooms and work on Google Jamboards. So the Jamboards look like this. And we're gonna, or each of your groups, so we'll have 8 groups in total, and you'll be working on the following 3 questions. Why are these SDGs relevant for your protected area of work? What are you doing to achieve them? And what more do you need to achieve them? And for every group, it's indicated what SDGs you'll be working on. So as you can see here, group 1 will work on SDG 1, 2, and 15. So when we're opening the breakout rooms in a second, just check the number of your room, and that corresponds to the number of your group. Sandra will put the link in the chat to the Jamboard, and you can move in between the different pages to get to your group at the top of the Jamboard just by clicking on the arrows. Now, how to provide your answers? It's also relatively simple. You just go to where this little arrow is pointing, and when you click on that, it will give you a digital sticky note. You'll immediately be able to start typing and then put it wherever you want, just like this. Just make sure that when you're answering to put the number of the SDG you're answering the question for in front of your answers. You'll have 20 minutes time for this, and me and Sandra will be looking from the back office if everybody is managing to fill in their Jamboards. If not, we'll jump in, and you can of course also jump back into the plenary session if needed. If you're feeling a little bit unsure or stuck on how to answer some of these questions, of course, have a look at the learning modules on the SDGimp website, and maybe you'll find the inspiration you need to start answering your questions. So, I'm just gonna look at the chat if there's any questions. Okay, so make sure that you have the Jamboard link open, and then we'll open the breakout rooms now, and you have 20 minutes and you'll automatically be summoned back to the main room, so don't worry about that. Feel free, by the way, the breakout rooms won't be recorded, so that will be a good time to open your microphone, start your video, and interact with the people who you're in a group with to together work on these questions. Okie doke, Sandra?
Rooms are ready. I'm opening them now.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for your participation in this exercise. Me and Sandra were going through the Jamboards and seeing input appear everywhere. So I'm guessing that's a good sign, even though I'm sure that it wasn't always easy to think of. So I've just been sort of looking at maybe a general consensus between the different Jamboards, and what I could definitely see is that there's a need for education amongst the staff. And I really hope that the SDGimp project is one of those educational tools, so to say, that can fill this need and fill this gap, and does support you in delivering on these sustainable development goals. Of course, something that's definitely popped up multiple times is political willingness, political support. And I think the time is now for protected areas. I think that is a feeling that we, at least at EUROPARC, are getting. more and more amongst between all the different policies, and of course this includes the SDGs as well. Protected areas, natural areas are recognized as being essential for proper implementation. And I think as protected areas, we also just need that confidence and that feeling like, hey, you can't do this without us. So give us what we need. And that is political support. And of course, also something that came up, is financial support. And strong alliances was another one. And I think that's, it's also one of the goals, partnerships for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I do believe that protected areas are sort of the connector between people and nature, and I'm sure that you can all agree with that as well. And this is also something that EUROPARC is very active in, stakeholder engagement. Our new project Life Enable will definitely have a strong focus on that as well. And I do encourage you to have a look at some previous webinars that we've also organized, where we've really looked at communication and stakeholder engagement actively as well. I think that could be of help also when thinking of, okay, how do we set up these partnerships? How do we manage effective stakeholder engagement? Another thing I saw popping up is the need for best practice examples. And that's again something where I think the SDGimp project can and will come in with the map of best practice examples that Christoph showed us quickly as well. And again, there I also do definitely invite you to have a look at the Knowledge Hub at the EUROPARC website, which is really full of best practice examples on a number of topics that are of relevance for protected areas. So this is, of course, just what I could quickly gather from all your inputs. If somebody would like to comment or say, okay, well, this is very essential and you haven't mentioned this, then please feel free to raise your hand now, and I'll gladly open the floor to you before we move to the closing part of our workshop. Thank you, Sandra. My colleague Sandra has put the link to our Knowledge Hub there as well. So indeed, I encourage you to have a look, and it's an open source, so to say. So you can also give us a knowledge of a case study of yourself. So you can fill out the online form if you say, hey, our protected area is doing this or that. And I think that deserves a platform. Then we're always happy to receive new inputs. I don't see any raised hands at the moment. The Jamboards will stay open for a little bit longer, so you're also free to go through that, have a look at what others were saying, and maybe get inspired. Of course, I can't summarize everything right here, but you're free to keep looking at the inputs that others provided. Okay, Christoph, sorry, did you want to mention something? I see a raised hand. Yes.
Yes, maybe one more last thought. There was a question about growth and SDG 8 before, and I think those are really good questions. And I mean, there are a lot of academic discussions about degrowth or approaches beyond capitalism. And what I want to do, or maybe what we want to do with the SDGimp project here is, I think we don't have time to wait for answers from that academic discussions, but we have to think about what we can do right now to transform the way we work and we live, and whether sustainable growth is an oxymoron or not. Well, we have to do something about climate change now, and I think I want to welcome you to look at our webpage and urge you to include the SDGs in your daily work, and trying to find solutions, practical solutions that can actually work in your region. That
perfect. Yeah, no, thank you, Christoph. I think it's a very important comment to make. Of course, there's plenty that needs to change, but change starts with one step at a time, so to say. And that is actually a nice little bridge to our final, well, assignment is a bit of a big word. But I want to ask each and every one of you to have a little thought about what you're going to be doing in the upcoming 2 weeks. So accompanying the Sustainable Development Goals are the Good Life Goals, and they represent an effort to answer the big questions that the SDGs are asking, to help a global audience recognize the vital role of individual action in achieving the SDGs. So Sandra will put a link in the chat to a new Jamboard, and there are the 17 Good Life Goals that are in direct correspondence with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I ask everyone to pretty much make a little postcard for themselves, go through these 17 Good Life Goals, and yeah, make your commitment to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And this can really be on a personal level, because if there's one thing that I think we can take away from this workshop today, or maybe two things, well, hopefully more things, but at least two things, is that the SDGs are interconnected, and change is needed on even the smallest or the most local of levels to achieve these global goals. So I welcome you to make a commitment there. It will be open for a little bit longer. I'll also make my commitment to be doing something good for the world and myself in the upcoming 2 weeks. And that is the end of our workshop today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank you for your participation. I know it's a little bit of a different format than what we're used to, but I think it worked well, and I'm really glad with all the input you provided. And I'm asking for one more tiny favor, and that is to fill out our feedback form. Sandra, that's the final link she'll have to put in the chat for me, is the link to our online survey. It's just a few questions about this workshop today, how you felt it went, if you were satisfied, and it will really greatly help us as EUROPARC improve our work in the upcoming years, and hope to keep producing relevant information for our network. So that was it from my side. The second Jamboard, like I said, will be open for a little bit longer. Make your commitment to the Sustainable and the Good Life Goals. And I want to thank Christoph Matthias for his presentation, and my colleague Sandra, of course, for helping me run this workshop. And I hope to welcome you soon in the upcoming webinars from EUROPARC. You can find them all on our website. So have a nice afternoon, everyone, and see you soon.